It is 6 p.m. Tonight is August 19th, 2020. This is the Upper Dublin School District Finance Committee of the Board of School Directors, and I will call the meeting to order. Tonight we have a quorum. We have myself, Stan Ropsky, and Mike Henderson as members of the committee. Our fourth committee member, Amy Francek, is unable to attend at least the beginning of the meeting. So we will get started without her. We also have several other board members and appropriate members of the administration with us. To kick things off, Mr. Leckman, do we have any announcements?
We do not have any announcements this evening.
All right, thank you. We do have minutes from our July 15th meeting. I'd like to move that we approve those. Stan and Mike, are you ready to approve those?
I second it.
All
Yeah,
right.
go ahead. Yes.
All right, so all three of us, all right, I'm not sure if we have to formally vote, but if you're approve those minutes, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you. The minutes are approved and they will appear on the legislative meeting agenda as an informational item. Moving on to the finance reports and recommendations, starting with a Sandy Run update. Is that Andy or Bob?
Bob will give that update.
All right, go ahead, Bob. Thank you.
Yes, the construction continues at a good pace. The construction site weathered the recent rainstorms we had, the tropical storm. Everything, we didn't have any major problems with flooding, which is a good sign, and the site remained workable the entire time. The work stopped during the rain, but next day they were right back working again. So the site held up very well. If you've driven past lately, a lot of changes. So the steel is now up for the auditorium. It's one of the larger structures in the building. You can see that right next to the gymnasium. The steel has been erected. Roofing materials on site. They should be starting on the roof on the completed areas of the gymnasium, A section of the classroom wing. Also on A section of the classroom wing, if you drive past, you'll see it now looks yellow. That is all the spray on insulation. That is critical to get that done now so they can start installing the brick walls. The masons didn't start on the first few rows of bricks. That is an important step in this process. Once the bricks are in, then they can start on the windows. So everything is progressing nicely. The third floor in section B of the classroom wing, they're starting to put those walls on now. The steel is in place, the decking is poured. So they continue to make good progress.
All right, thank you for that update. And of course, there are a number of photos and other information available in the attachment. I will note in the attachment, it does look like we are back on schedule based on the phasing dates in that document. There are no page numbers, but there is a phasing date section which does indicate it looks like we are back on schedule. Andy, anything to call our attention to in the budget update?
No, there is nothing substantial or material to bring to your attention this evening.
All right, thank you very much. Let's move on to the capital projects update. I assume that's Bob.
Yes, we had three large projects this summer that one was a continuation of projects started last summer. The other were two new projects. The first was Maple Glen sprinkler heads. We had older sprinkler heads. Some were recalled, but they're also at the end of their life. We had a contractor come in and replace every sprinkler head in the building. Project went well. We didn't have any change orders. So the project was completed for the bid price without any change orders attached or corrections. Fire Marshal has signed off on that project, and that is 100% completed. Second project we had was the Fort Washington roof. We had the repairs that we had made to anchor down the existing membrane so we can extend our warranty. That was based on some problems that were discovered. That project is completed as well. We did come in about $6,000 under budget. We had some allowances that were not needed. Carlisle Roofing, the manufacturer of the membrane, has been out They approve of all the work that has been completed, and we are back under warranty with that roof again. And our final project, the one that we started last year, was our Fort Washington window project. They are 100% complete. The air conditioners have been installed through the new windows. New doors have been put in the connecting hallways that lead out to the courtyards. And we do have just a few punch list items, very minor, just a little bit of caulking in places and final connection of some of the electric locks. We want them to run the wires inside the channels instead of outside. So that those corrections are being taken. That punch list should be completed by the end of the month. We're in very good shape there. We do have one change order that we'll be discussing for the window replacements. Was expected, and we'll be discussing as our next item.
Okay, thank you. Comments or questions on those items from the committee? Stan? You're still muted, Stan.
Yes, I had a question on the Sandy Run update. You didn't see my hand, so. Bob, I went by that construction site right after that heavy rainstorm, and there's a on-site, it looks like an above-ground stormwater detention center. Is that going to be above ground, or is there something going to go on top of that stormwater detention basin?
No, all of our stormwater detention will be underground, be under parking lots, be under the multi-purpose field. What you're seeing now are the temporary water retaining structures during the construction. They're necessary for the phasing purpose. We did above ground until we can get the underground installed. Once the project is completed, everything is signed off. The erosion and settlement has been signed off on. Those will get filled in. Right now we have two above ground detention basins. One is under, is where the previous football field was. That'll get filled in. That'll become football and soccer fields again. And the other one is closer to Twining and Limekiln. That will get filled in. That will be one of our softball fields.
All right, Jen, I
Great,
see you.
thank you.
Go ahead, Jen.
Oh, yeah, there I am. Hi. Bob, can you tell me a little bit about the windows at Fort Washington? How far do they open, and like what type of window they are?
They are a double pane, high efficiency window. We have two windows in each classroom that are operable. They do have screens in them. The windows open out. And they were designed, it's a large opening. Even though it is only one window, the architects and the engineers on this project did calculate what we are required for fresh air. And the openings are meet with code for the air. They don't swing too far out, so they're not a hazard for anybody walking past. But for allowing air, it is meeting what the code is for outside air.
Thank you.
All right, any other comments or questions on A or B? All right, thank you. So let's move on to the window replacement change order that you mentioned.
Yes, this is a carryover with the same situation we found last year. Above the headers of the windows where the shades are hung was a wood panel that everything was attached to at the top of the windows. Over years, from condensation, from leaks, the wood just delaminated. It was very unsightly, and so what we did was have the contractor cap that wood with aluminum. The change order for that was $4,295. It really makes the inside finished product look much better.
All right, thank you. So members of the committee, well, first, any comments or questions from the committee or the board? All right, so are we prepared to move that one forward to the legislative meeting? And
Yes.
Yes, okay, thank you. So we'll move that forward. Next up are the monthly financial reports, Mr. Leckman.
Yes, thank you. So the monthly financial reports, I changed the title of this agenda item from Treasurer's Report to Monthly Financial Reports. This will now include the standard monthly Treasurer's Reports that the board, the committee and the board would receive every month, along with a packet of monthly financial reports to enhance or go along with the Treasurer's Reports. What I want to say, this reporting packet is sort of a first draft. So this is something, there's similar graphs, reports that I've been giving to you in presentations over the last 3 months, and I thought it was just best to more formalize it and put it into a reporting packet that I present to you every month. Just so we can stay up to date on what's going on, primarily with local revenues, trends from month to month. So, we've been primarily focused on local tax revenues and the impact of those revenues as a result of the pandemic and the economic issues that are going on out there in the world right now. So while it's still very new to us, and I don't have a ton of information right now, what these reports will do will give us month to month views and updates on what's happening so we can monitor this, especially as we begin the process already of trying to figure out how we're going to create a budget for the 2021-2022 school year, which would typically start in the next month or two already. So a couple highlights that I just want to walk through. Again, on the June Treasurer's Report, the highlights that I want to cover are that these are now estimates, as we've been giving you on a monthly basis, sort of estimates or projections through the end of June 30, 2020, which is the end of our fiscal year. The largest outstanding item I would say that we have at this point, while there's lots of things we still have to button up and close up as we prepare for our audit, the largest outstanding item is the state subsidy for PSERS and FICA that we get back from the state. PSERS being, for anyone new listening in, the state retirement system, and then FICA, which is Social Security and Medicare. We do get a reimbursement from the state for our Social Security share on FICA. As we discussed last month, the reason that's open still, many of our professional staff do receive paychecks through the summer months. So they choose to be paid over 26 pays, which goes over the summer. But those paychecks they're receiving now are for services that they provided during the 2019-2020 school year. So we still have to wait for all those pays to happen. We have to charge all those expenses back to the last year, and then we need to do some calculations and entries to estimate what the state subsidy of PSERS and FICA will be. So the current estimates right now show a surplus of about 1.65 million for last school year, which would leave our ending unassigned fund balance around $7.6 million, which is still very much in line with what I've been talking to you all about for the last 2 or 3 months at this point. In the July Treasurer's Report, just quick updates. We've seen strong real estate tax collections in July. So if you look at on there again, the Treasurer's Report show you year to date where we're at through July as compared to year to date through July of last year. You can see there that we have a little over $7.7 million in collections for real estate as compared to 5.873 million from last year. So I note that because it's substantial, but I believe it's hard to read too much into that number right now, specifically because if you think about how the tax payment periods are set up, we have our discount period that's set up through the end of August. So it's possible that there was just an influx of collections that happened at the end of July. Really the better comparison period will be as we close out August, when we talk next month to say, okay, as of the end of the discount period, which a lot of folks take advantage of, this is how much we've collected compared to last year. But it is noteworthy just to point out. The other noteworthy item is EIT collections. You can see that earned income tax, we've collected almost $279,000 in July as compared to $69,000 last year. Now in the other reporting package, there's some more information around EIT, but I'll point it out here that as we've been discussing, if you remember, typical tax filing date is April 15th every year. As a result of everything that's going on, that tax filing date was pushed back to July 15th. So it's possible, again, we don't have all of the data on this yet, but it's possible that many individuals, businesses waited until that July date to file their taxes. And if you remember last year, July shows here an increase of $225,000 year over year. but April through June of last year, we showed a decrease of a little over $300,000 during those periods. The other thing, again, to point out, we're still working with Berkheimer on some of the data behind this, but Upper Dublin Township, as of the end of June, still does have a 10% unemployment rate. So some of what we're seeing, we can't be certain right now. Again, we don't see all the data behind these numbers, but that's some of the information we're seeing right now. So before I jump into the other financial reports, I'll stop there on the treasurer's reports and just see if there's any questions about what I just talked about from the board or committee.
All right, comments or questions? No? All right, let's move forward.
All right, so on the other financial reports package, so similar to the way I've been talking about the treasurer's reports on a month-to-month basis, what I'd like to do is tonight I'll just walk through the reports so you know what's there. But on a month-to-month basis, I'll do what we do with the treasurer's reports. I will just point out sort of highlights or key points that I think you need to be aware of. So this first page it covers the report in here is a report that I've shared on a monthly basis as part of the finance committee. Again, we haven't walked through it, but it's a report that should look familiar to you, which is a summary of our overall finances, revenues and expenses. You get 2 years of actual data here, the estimated for 1920, budget for 2021, and then our projections as we look out here. And again, I think the key thing I want to point out here are the key highlights at the top, which are things that we've been talking about as we've been working through the budget from last year and talking about some of the financial challenges ahead. Are what you see here is that, yes, we're talking about for the 1920 year ending with a surplus, but the general trend has been over the last 3 to 4 years has been a decrease in that surplus that we're seeing every year. So we finished better than budget, but the surplus is getting smaller and smaller. We still do have a 2021 budget that includes a 3.86 million gap between revenues and expenses. So again, it's just important. It's a key highlight for our budget that we need to be aware of. We've talked about it a number of times and know we need to work on that, but we have that gap that we're working on. The future projections, the trends show our deficit increasing, and it's based on our assumptions that we've been talking about. So you can see 2% annual tax increases. That does not mean that the board's committed to any increases. It just means that's what's in our projection assumptions. And again, we know there's new development happening out there in the community, and none of that new development is factored in. And then funding capital projects, we know we have significant assets across the districts, building equipment that need to be maintained. We do have a capital reserve fund with about $6 million in it, but we do not have any funds in the 2021 budget or beyond in the projections to fund that. So those are all things that we need to be working on. The next report is a new report, and I thought this report was very important for us to take a look at on a month-to-month basis. So thank you, Brooke, if you scroll down to page 2 there. So what this report gives you is, we talk about assessed value, which is the value of all of the properties across the township. And again, we talked about assessed value versus market value. Assessed value being what generates our tax revenue. That's what's used for the calculation for our tax revenue. Market value being, if you sold a property, what would it actually sell for on the market? So assessed value is really what drives our calculation. And what's happening is throughout the year, assessed value is changing on a month-to-month basis. There's all kinds of things that are happening that are changing that number. And again, we typically talk about this on a budget-wide, one number basis, but there's lots of stuff happening behind the scenes here. So I thought it was important to give a monthly report that shows what changed from month to month, what's actually happening out there. So as you look at it, there's different sections. One being monthly basic charges, which are, anything that's happening from month to month. If you get a permit and you finish your basement, or someone adds an addition onto a house, or a new house on a, one single property, or what I'm calling basic. Then you have your new developments, which, we've got a bunch out there, the Promenade, the Enclave, there's new developments happening. So Madison Estates, so making sure we're seeing what's going on with those new developments as a separate item individually. And then also we have large commercial real estate assessment appeals that happened that changed this. So when we talk about new development may bring in new assessed value, but if we have a large reduction on a commercial property, you know, it can have just as fast as the assessed value went up for new development, it can be wiped out by a commercial assessment. So this report will show us that on a month-to-month basis. Page 3 is the EIT trends. Again, so this is a report I've shown you. Again, I won't walk through this in too much detail because we talked about it with the treasurer's reports, but this gives you 2 separate reports. The top graph is a monthly trend, you know, as you look back over the last 3 years and then the current year as compared month to month. And then the chart right below that is a comparison of, it will be year to date as you look back over the last couple of years. So as of the end of July, that's what that bottom graph reflects on this page. Page 4 is your transfer tax. So again, as properties sell across the district, the school district receives a transfer tax on the sale of that property. And what I'll keep on there as well, not only you'll see the trend, but I'll also keep notes about what large commercial properties may have had transactions within any given month, so we can see what's going on there with large sort of abnormal transactions in the district. And then page 5 is at the last meeting, someone requested a report showing how the new CARES funds, these are the federal dollars that are flowing into school districts to help them prepare for this upcoming school year with all the changes that are going on. Again, PPE for, you know, when eventually students come back into school, software and other things that are needed to operate in a virtual learning model like we'll be starting the year up under. That's all what will go into these funds. Again, they're very specific in how we can use these funds. And what the numbers you see right now represent are only what's been actually spent to date. So there's lots going on behind the scenes. You know, we're looking for suppliers that can meet our needs. We have to go through bidding processes for larger purchases. So there's things that take time. There was PPE that we knew we needed to get for day one in the event that we were back in schools, and that needed to happen well before we even started talking about a virtual learning model for next year. So we have some PPE in the buildings. We're working on inventory and distribution models, but we'll keep this up to date as we move through the year as a regular course of reporting. And again, I'll point out, this is a first draft. This is an idea that I had that said there's just things that we need to keep a close pulse on right now. We could update these reports, edit these reports. We can add reports throughout the year as we see necessary, but this was what I thought important to start with, at least for tonight. So I will stop there and take any questions.
All right, thanks, Andy. Comments or questions from the committee or the board? Art, I see your hand is up.
Yes, I just, 4 things. Number one is I just wanted to thank Andy and Steve for putting this document together. It is excellent. It is excellent. Really gives us a great picture of where we are and where we're going. I do have 3 questions. One is, what will be the audit process this year? I know they usually come in. I'm curious in terms of what their thinking is in terms of the audit. Second question, if I can just ask the 3 of them, is when you talk about the, I guess it is page 2, I'm wondering when you talk about the new developments, how you will be showing that as a running total? Because right now there's only, it's first month, so we're seeing what we're seeing in the first month. I'm wondering if you're going to make something similar to what you have above for the assessed values. And then the third question is the additional Fed dollars that we're getting. Is that reflected anywhere in the budget, page 1, I guess, for 2021? Or is that additional revenue that we're getting, which will slightly offset the $4 million that we're short?
So Jen, you feel free to jump in if you have anything to add on the audit. I mean, I don't know that there's anything different that the audit's going to bring this year. It's, you know, it's our typical annual audit. They come in sometime mid-September to do their on-site portion of the work. They were already in over the summer to do some preliminary work, which is a typical part of the process. And then I think typically, they will be back to present a final audit in the November timeframe. So I think that's what we're hearing is going to be pretty standard this year.
Right.
Jen, you have anything to add there?
No, they're scheduled for September 16th for 3 days that they'll be here to do the audit, and they'll be distant, separate in the rooms, but it's good that they're actually coming here to do the audit. So, but
Yeah, that was
the
my
preliminary
concern.
went
Maybe they
very
would
well.
not. Yeah, because
So,
some states, the feds, a lot of it now is only an online audit. So I'm just wondering if they were still being here, and they will be wearing masks and socially.
they'll be wearing masks
social
and just, they'll be distancing themselves, and a lot of emails back and forth, but they're scheduled for 3 days.
And then Art, on your second question, so again, these are new reports, and I think that's probably a good question is, maybe I could summarize this first page and then create a secondary sheet that lays out by month, so you don't have to go back and compare to prior months. So I actually like that. That's something I can, we can look to add.
Andy, with the budget, the top of page 2, we talk about the budget assessment, 2.25 trillion. That is where we thought, that's what we put in to our documents to the state, correct?
Correct. 2.25 million is what, right, 2.25 billion is what we used as what we generated our budget on, and that assumed the prudential, because the township only, or the county gave us the 2.283 million, but we know we have the prudential credit. It didn't decrease Prudential's assessed value, so we have to account for that ourselves. And then we know we've got a bunch of commercial assessment appeals that are out there, so that's why we adjusted it down. So yes.
That 11.5 is your best, not a guess, but your best prediction at this point.
Yeah, right. And I think when we talked about it, that's probably about half of what we've got out there right now as potential impact. Okay. The federal dollars, Dr. Levinowitz, those are absolutely included in the budget. We knew about that stuff before we finalized the budget. So we do have a revenue allocation and an expense allocation for those items. So it doesn't change our budget at all.
Okay, other comments or questions, Mike?
Andy, do we have any projections yet on the additional cost, both in the first marking period for, COVID, additional cleaning, COVID, additional PPE for the teachers that'll be working in the classrooms? And my second question is, have we started looking at projections for if we go to either a hybrid schedule, full schedule, starting in the first week or second week of November, start estimating or forecasting additional cost to bring the kids back?
So, Andy, can I jump in just to begin
Certainly.
with? So, to Mr. Henderson's question, the CARES funding that Andy just talked about, we expect that to be completely expended. It has to be expended by October 31st. So we expect that full sum. So that's 277,000. And then beyond that, we're continuing to work with a number of vendors, as Mr. Leckman said. We're continuing to work with the county and also with the intermediate unit on trying to do some bulk purchases in terms of PPE and cleaning supplies. To be determined in terms of what the cost will be when we bring students back. That will vary based upon the number of families that elect to stay in Cardinal Academy and the number of students that elect to come back for in-person instruction. But each month moving forward, we can absolutely provide an update about what we know those costs would be or projected to be, starting with our next Finance Committee meeting.
Thanks.
All right, anyone else with comments or questions? So I'd just like to add or reinforce the thank you that Art gave for these reports, the newer reports especially. I think it's very helpful to look at things like the monthly change in assessed value and the monthly trend in EIT, et cetera, because it's easy, I think, for us to fall into a little bit of a trap, thinking of these as simple annual numbers that go into the big budget, when there really is a lot of movement through the year on these items. So we'll get a much better appreciation, especially EIT. I think, it's not one of our larger funding sources, but it is a relatively big one. It's worth paying attention to and understanding the way that it flows, especially in these relatively uncertain times with respect to EIT. So thanks, Andy, for putting that together and presenting it to us. So all of these will move forward as reports on the legislative agenda. Let's move on to the Mciu joint purchasing agreement.
Yeah, so if you remember back to the June board meeting, annually we asked the school board to approve a list of cooperative purchasing groups that we utilize to do district purchasing by law, by state law. So that was done in June. One of the purchasing groups that we use is the Montgomery County Intermediate Unit. And again, we just spoke about that. So one example of that was the PPE purchase that we did. So we combined with all of the school districts across the county. We worked through the Montgomery County Intermediate Unit, and we went out and did a county-wide bid, again, on quantities and to hopefully get preferred pricing by purchasing that way. And because over a certain dollar amount, we're required to go through a formal bidding process. So the current agreement that we have with the Montgomery County Intermediate Unit dated back to the early 90s, 1993, I think it was. So all this is, and the MCIU does require board approval for this, is just an update to the language of the agreement to make it more current with current requirements, to make sure all of our participants are covered by the agreement. So there's no cost to this. It's just what we need to sign to stay a part of that purchasing cooperative.
And certainly we've benefited greatly from being members of that joint purchasing process in the past, and I'm sure in the future. Any comments or questions from the committee or the rest of the board? Okay, we're ready to move that one forward. Stan and Mike? I see nods. Yes, okay. So we'll move that one forward to the legislative, and we're up to a settlement stipulation for Somerset Street.
Yep, this is just this is a residential assessment appeal that came through. The owner appealed. They did receive a reduction from the county, but they appealed that as well. So this is a small residential. It has an impact of, with the settlement, of $1,102 would be the reduction in annual revenue, as opposed to going to court over this. So the recommendation from our solicitor is to move forward with this settlement stipulation.
All right, comments or questions from the board or committee?
I concur.
All right, I agree as well. Stan? Can't see Stan's photo at the moment. Are you nodding?
No questions.
Okay. All right, we'll move this one forward to the legislative meeting as well. And we are up to community input. So as a reminder, I see some relatively new names on the list. The way this works, each committee member has up to 4 minutes to speak. When you are called upon, please state your name and what part of the township you live in before you start your comments, and there will be a 4-minute time limit. And Ms. Evans will keep track of that for us, and it will be displayed on the screen. So I see one. So Jen Kuznets, go ahead.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, Jen Kuznets, Fort Washington. I just was curious, the Upper Dublin unemployment rate of 10%, what is like the average rate for Upper Dublin before COVID? I'm just, I guess, trying to gauge impact from that. And then I just want to make sure I was understanding. So our deficit, we show the projections to grow out to $6 million, not including any new construction projects that come online. So for it to grow out to 6 million, but that includes a 2% tax increase each year, but again, does not take into account any new development. I just want to make sure I understood that correctly. And then I'm curious, I saw some things going around that we're not going to be providing busing for private school students. I'm wondering what the savings is for that. I don't know if you discussed that as the first topic. I came in maybe 5 or 6 minutes late. So I'm just curious, how many buses do we typically have, riding around in a normal year, and how many, I guess, are we not? And are we furloughing those bus drivers? What's happening on that level for savings? And then I'm a little bit concerned. I understand we're using PPE, and we are buying like cleaning supplies and materials. And I know that we've already had to do that for the construction crew over at Sandy Run. So that's not even really for the students at this point. So I guess part of my question is, what are we doing in the classrooms other than providing masks and shields? It seems like the teachers don't feel comfortable with that as an option, that they're looking for something more. Are we looking into like dividers, plexiglass situations to separate teachers out a bit from students, or to make smaller groups of students within a classroom, like cohorts? I'm just wondering if, we're like, what the plan is for November, because it doesn't seem like masks and shields and cleaning supplies is what the staff is looking for. And then let me see what else I had. I was taking notes here, but I guess that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next up, Mr. Fricker. Ted, you are muted. You can unmute yourself if you are able. All right, let's try this. I have unmuted you. Oh, no, I haven't. I am unable to unmute you. Okay, while I try to figure out what's going on there, let's move on to Ms. Vitella. You're up.
Hi, everybody. Jenny Vitella, Ambler. I trust you can hear me.
Yes, we can. Yep.
Okay. It's weird on this end. Anyway, so as far as the construction goes, is there any chance, since there's no kids, no traffic, no nothing, no buses, that they could be put on a fast forward motion, especially since we are in need of space in our new COVID world? Wondering if that is at all possible. And also, I just want to talk about the EIT. Obviously, we are recognizing that on a cash basis, and the tax deadline moved from April 15th to July 15th. But that is based on 2019 income still. That is not necessarily 2020 income. So Annie may have said that. I'm actually out and about, so I didn't maybe miss that. But I just want to make sure that that is clear with that information. And I was just wondering, will our gap close, our financial gap close, because the buildings are closed? I mean, there's got to be savings in maintenance, lights, air conditioning, certainly the transportation that Jen already mentioned, and lights. And Bob, I'm so curious about the pool. With nobody in that pool, what are we doing with that pool? I mean, pools need to have people in them to stir up stuff. The pump would have to be working overtime. I'm just curious about the pool. That's on a side sort of personal note. And also, have we considered using some of that money, the CARES money, for purchasing video equipment and lights for a virtual world, so that lighting is on teachers in this classroom and there's proper videos taken of them? I mean, I do like the teachers in the classroom, because I think it sets the tone for education, which is going to be a little, interesting at home, trying to make those desks and areas for kids to really concentrate on school. So I just wondered if we thought about that. And then my other thing is about sports. I see that we aren't bringing that up at all today. And I presume that there will have to be a vote of some sort on Monday. We haven't had a presentation, so it seems rushed, although I can tell you, as a parent of multiple children in multiple sports across multiple areas, like high school, middle school, township, outside, There's so much angst around that, and we really want to get back. I'm actually at a baseball game, and that kind of brings me to my next question, that I'm not sure why all the preseason workouts that were voluntary were shut down immediately when during our last legislative meeting, when we went virtual, it was specifically said that we could continue those. And I'm just curious, there seems to be some inconsistency on field usage, whether it's a high school team using a field or a township team or an outside team or whatever. And like maybe baseball can play, but field hockey can't play, or football can't work out on the, it's very confusing. There's growing angst among students who are suffering the most in this and yet are the least likely to get sick. And I'm just curious if we have a set policy of why some of our fields are usable, some aren't, some places can use it, and what's going on. And will we get more clarification, I guess, on Monday? I was hoping for sooner so it could be digested and questions could be asked and answered about sports, because I can assure you that we've been participating in them all summer at various locations, in various different sports, and all has gone well following protocols and safety. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Just a reminder, if anyone else would like to speak during community input, please do raise your hands. I see Mr. Fricker has left and come back. Ted, if you want to try again.
Yes, please. Thank you. Sorry, I lost my connection.
Yep, we hear you now.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Ted Fricker, Director.
Mr. Fricker, unfortunately, I'm not. I heard you at the beginning.
I think Jen Kuznets touched on first is the projection of the 6. Am I still here? Hello?
Yeah, you're back again. Try again.
Sorry, I apologize. The projected $6 million budget shortfall, is that for the end of the 22 fiscal? The 10% unemployment, what impact is that having on our budget? And what impact will the vacancy rates in the township for businesses for employed outside of Upper Dublin have on the budget? I think that's about it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And anyone else wish to speak during community input? All right, seeing none, I will close community input. And let me go back to the agenda here. And we'll have, if there are answers, we'll start. Dr. Yanni, anything to answer there?
Sure, I'll start with sports. If you see me looking down, it's because I'm actually reading a chain of emails right now. We know that the PIAA is meeting on Friday, but our athletic director has a Division I meeting tomorrow evening. I will ask him to push out a communication on Friday about field usage and to clarify anything that needs to be clarified. Our superintendent group in Montgomery County, we're continuing to dialogue about sports, and I would hope to have more information by close of business on Friday as well. In terms of PPE, the PPE that's being used by the contractors is not being supplied by the district. It's the contractors that are and their companies that are providing PPE. And in terms of what we're doing to make people less concerned about coming into our buildings, we are looking at a variety of different things, including different cleaning products and different methods of cleaning. In terms of the non-public transportation, just for everyone's edification, we do not, the school code requires school districts to provide identical transportation to non-publics that we do for our own students. So therefore, during the virtual period, we will not be transporting any of our non-public students. There are a number of personnel actions that will appear on Monday evening's legislative agenda, and we're still in the process of talking with staff at this time, so I'm not comfortable sharing any additional information right now.
All right, thank you. There were a couple of questions regarding the end of year fund balance numbers presented. Anything to say there, Andy?
Yeah, Mark, I have a couple of things just to add in. There was a question about the unemployment rate just as a comparable. So we do get, we're getting regular reporting on that from the county. And going back, it's to either January or February. So before all this sort of started, our unemployment rate was about 3.3% as a comparable. No new developments are not in the projections. Again, I think that was asked just to clarify. So when you start to look out at the projections, no new developments are factored into that. And we spent a lot of time discussing that during the budget process, why we took that approach. $6 million, that's the projected deficit between revenues and expenses as of the 22-23 budget. So as you look out 2 years beyond this budget is where the $6 million gap comes from. And yes, so when you look at EIT, certainly, their incomes change over time. So I think Ms. Vitella was talking about 2019 income versus 2020 income. So certainly there's some of that factored in. But again, we're working with our county tax collector, which is Berkheimer, to work through some of those projections.
All right, thank you. And is there a realistic way to get to Mr. Fricker's comment to highlight in maybe those monthly reports what impact unemployment is having, or we just look at that with regard to EIT?
Yeah, I'm not sure how to answer that at this point. I mean, the EIT is sort of is a lagging indicator. So we're seeing that we're seeing unemployment rates after we're seeing EIT come in. And EIT, we don't get all the data behind EIT. That flows all through our county tax collector, Berkheimer. So, that's certainly something we can talk to Berkheimer about and see what we can do. But I don't have a good answer for that right now.
Right, and I guess the same thing applies to vacancy rates in the commercial properties. That has potential for impact on future sales costs and therefore future assessment values. But again, it would be a big lag between the current situation and when that would manifest in our budget.
That's correct. And that would depend on, if property owners come through, like you said, and file assessment appeals. As far as EIT on that, I mean, we don't get any data on staffing and how staffing is affecting EIT. So that would be really difficult information to come upon.
Right. All right, other comments from the board? Stan, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, again, it's the same two people that keep asking a dozen of questions every meeting. It's so simple to email, just say, for instance, the school bus question. How many school buses are on the road and how much money are the taxpayers in? How do you expect the school directors to know that answer or the superintendent to know that answer tonight? You could have easily emailed the director of transportation, Christopher Robbins, and he would have definitely given you the answer.
All right, anyone else with comments or questions?
I would like, if I could ask Mr. Lester, there was a question about the pool.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I think that I want to make sure that people understand what maintenance is being done on the pool.
Yes. When we shut down, we had discussions with Deep Run Aquatics, who we use for consulting on some of our pool. The question went as we went along, do we completely drain the pool, shut it down? What steps do we take? And we came to the conclusion, we shut down the pool, we're running the pumps, the filters, chlorine, several times a week. We're monitoring the levels every day. We're looking at the quality of the water. We really did think about draining it and just being done with it, not having to worry about it. But we were worried about the equipment sitting that long. Any equipment that likes to be underwater, you take the water away from it and sit it around air. Odds are it's not going to want to work correctly when you do start back up. So we have reduced the operations, the number of hours that pumps run. So we are significantly saving on chemicals. the electricity for the pool. We are still maintaining the humidity in an auditorium just so we don't have other problems with the actual structure, the finishes, and the building. So we are maintaining it, but not on a 24/7 operation that we were.
All right, thank you for that update. Anything else? Okay, then I will announce the next Finance Committee meeting will be Wednesday, September 16th, 2020 at 6 p.m. I think we don't know yet whether that will be, I assume it will be online, but you never know. So look for an announcement on that. And we will reset for the Policy Committee meeting chaired by Mr. Wallach coming up after a short break. This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Ms. Evans, are we just going to stay on this meeting?
That's my understanding. It's the same room.
Okay.
So what time are we going to be back?
I think we can have Ms. Evans, if you can stop broadcasting, and then if we could come back at 7 o'clock. Does that work for everyone?
That's what I wanted to hear. Thank you.
Sure. Great.
Yeah.
Broadcasting again?
All set.
All right. It's 7 o'clock, so welcome back to everyone. I'm going to call to order the August meeting of the Policy Committee for August the 19th, 2020. We have 3 members of the committee, I believe, in attendance tonight. Myself, Dr. Davis, and Mr. Sirota, so we have a quorum. Ms. Franczyk could not be here this evening with us. Policy Committee did not meet in July, so this is our first meeting as we start looking to A, wrap up some policies that we talked about in June, and B, to move forward with new policies that we'll be reviewing and addressing for the upcoming school year. Tonight we dive into one area in particular in 2 proposed new policies to be shared with the board and the committee that deal with the new Title IX regulations, which are a very complex body of regulations that were recently promulgated in the country and have various impacts both to higher education and K-12 education, and necessitate some fairly intense and involved policy work at all levels. So with that introduction, welcome everyone, and we'll move into the agenda items. Dr. Yanni, any announcements or communications? Dr. Yanni, I think you were muted.
Sorry about that. No, there are no announcements this evening.
Okay, excellent. Minutes, we did not meet in July, so I believe there are no minutes that we need to put forward for the legislative agenda. So we can move right into our policy report. As I said, we have 2 policies up for second reading. These were first readings in June, 902 and 911, and then we have 2 second reading repeals. Dr. Yanni, I guess we'll start with number 902, which is the, I'm sorry, 901, which is the public relations objectives. Is there anything that we should know about this policy from June until now as it goes to second reading?
There have really been no changes. I just want to remind everyone that we took a number of public relations policies and we really are keeping 901 and keeping the language from some of those other policies as administrative regulations. So we have 901, as Mr. Wallach said, public relations objectives, and then we have 3 administrative regulations that are there just for everyone's review. Community relations objectives, publications, and media relations. But there are no substantive changes from our meeting in June.
Excellent. Members of the committee or other board members in attendance, any questions or comments about 901 proceeding to second reading? Okay, seeing none, we will move.
Sorry, I'm not sure why I don't have my raise hand button here for some reason, but
No problem, Mark.
I'll figure that out in a minute. In the meantime, there were two things about 901 that caught my attention as I reread them before tonight. One is I'm wondering in the purpose, it says at the very end of the purpose, it says informs and encourages active stakeholder participation in the educational goals and programs of the district schools. I'm wondering if educational goals and programs is too narrow. And maybe we can drop educational and just make it goals and programs.
I think so. I'm fine with that. I think that's
the other
fine.
thing that caught my attention, and I don't necessarily think we need any changes, but I just want to mention it in case anybody does. But in guidelines number 2, it says determine which particular areas of the district or school programs, policies, or operations need further clarification or explanation. The key verb there is determine, and it is the only one of these that is sort of a feedback thing and not a push. And that implies that within the administrative regulation, there will be a bidirectional, or at least an intake mechanism. It's the only thing here that says that there needs to be an intake mechanism. I wasn't sure whether we really want to cover that in another policy or whether we want to bury it in this one. And I mean, it needs to be somewhere. But, I'm not, yeah, that's probably it, Art. That's all I wanted to say about that. I mean, if anyone wants to say anything else, I'm okay with leaving it as it is. It's not obvious to me that this is the right policy for it.
Why don't we go ahead and take it out of this policy? What I will do, I'll bring back a recommendation next month about where, some options of where it could go.
That works for me.
Yeah, because I agree. Now that I'm looking at it, Mr. Sirota, I'm not sure I like it there. Ms. Evans, can you make sure that that's stricken for, as this goes to the board for a second reading?
Yes, we don't have to bring it back for another second reading?
No.
Just
no.
want to clarify. Okay, thank you.
Agreed.
Brooke, also, can you please make me no longer a co-host? I think that's why I don't have a raise hand button.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks, Art, for pointing that out.
I was wondering why there was a... Thank you.
All right, anyone else have anything on 901? Seeing none with those changes, we will move them forward to the legislative agenda. And next we will move to the second reading of 913, which is non-school organization groups and individuals. Dr. Yanni, anything we need to know that's been changed or otherwise in the second reading?
No. The only changes that we made were as a result of the first reading.
Excellent. Committee members, board members, any comments, questions, or discussion about 913? Seeing none, we'll move 913 to the legislative agenda for second reading as well. With that, we're done with our second readings. We'll move on the agenda to 502, which is the second reading repeals. We have 2 second reading repeals, 902 Publications Program and 911 News Media Relations. As we had talked about on the first reading repeals, these are being repealed because, as Dr. Yanni mentioned a little bit ago, they've been blended either into 901 or, more importantly, into the AR that will follow 901 going forward. On that, any questions, comments, or discussion from the committee or the board? Excellent. We'll move those 2 repeals forward to the legislative agenda as well. And that brings us to 503, which is our first readings for the month. We have 3 policies there, and 2 are somewhat related in that Title IX context. 1 is slightly different. So I think we're going to take them each separately so that we can really kind of talk about these. The first up is 103, which is educational equity and non-discrimination in, no, wait, that's the wrong title. I'm sorry. It's 103. Yeah, it's discrimination, Title IX, sexual harassment affecting students. I just read the wrong title. I apologize for that.
So, no,
Dr. Yanni, little intro.
Sure. So right now we have policy 103, which is our equity policy. PSBA has suggested that that equity policy gets moved to the 800s under operations. And the reason they're making that suggestion is because equity, they want the equity policy to encompass more than just what happens in a classroom. So there should be equity across all domains and facets of the district. What I've asked is, or what I will be asking, is for our Equity and Empowerment Steering Committee to look at our existing policy and work with me to revise it, to enhance it, to make it more comprehensive. And then we'll bring that back in another month or so to this committee for a first reading. So I don't want anyone to think because that's policy 103 and we're looking at a policy 103 here that we're negating or taking away the equity policy. The equity policy is not going anywhere. It's just going to be expanded to include more facets of the district. With that, leave it to a complex legislative change during a pandemic. Title IX has really changed the landscape. And I know that Dr. Rita Perez, our Director of Student Services, and Ms. Ashley Kitten, our Director of Human Resources, are both on here. And I'm not sure if they want to pipe up a little bit and talk about the training that they've had. But Title IX is going to require us to really look at a number of our policies over the next couple of months. And because the legislation hasn't been tested in court yet, we are recommending to look at the sample policies that PSBA has put out and adopt those after some review. So Ms. Kitten or Dr. Perez, did you want to say anything about the Title IX training that you've had or what we need to do as a district to be Title IX compliant?
Sure, I'll start out and Dr. Perez, you can jump in and please pipe up it with anything that I inevitably forget. But we, as a district, Dr. Perez and I took part in some train the trainer to become certified Title IX coordinators through a national organization called ATICSA, which really gave us a wealth of information to be able to serve as the district's Title IX coordinators and a lot of really useful information to push out to families, students, and all of our employees. And then we participated in a Montgomery County specific legal training with all of our administrators who would take part in anything Title IX. A lot has changed, as Dr. Yanni alluded to. Of course, in the middle of a pandemic, we're dealing with the changes that we need to go through with these processes and procedures. So the way that we as coordinators handle and give out responsibilities to our investigators, to our decision makers, to our appellates, all of that is slightly changing. So we have already worked with our administrators who will be responsible for that so that they understand the responsibilities that will be delegated to them. So I think that we've kind of cleaned up internally what our processes and procedures are going to look like. And like Dr. Yanni said, because so much of this is untested, we're really looking at sample policies to be drafted and move forward with, and then really dig down as we need to make any changes as new things come to fruition and to light as these things will be tested.
Thank you, Ashley. Thank you so much.
Ms. Kitten pretty much summed it up. I think from my end, having done Title IX investigations on the student end previously as well, I think some of these processes are tightened up a little bit compared to the previous rules. However, there are some aspects of the new law that are of concern, especially when it comes to victims and protecting victims in the process. So we're going to have to work through some of those so that we can support the accuser, let's put it that way, in this process in some way.
Thank you. Thank you both. So if we take a look at the sample policy 103, you will see a lot of bold language, language that's in boldface. The reason that language is in boldface, that is all of the new language that PSBA is recommending that we add to our policy so that we are fully Title IX compliant. Mr. Wallach, did you want me to go sort of paragraph by paragraph? Did you want me to summarize the different sections? How would you like to proceed?
I mean, whatever your preference is, Dr. Yanni, but I think summarizing sections might be the most useful in order to give us some direction. It's rather long to go paragraph by paragraph. Not to say we can't do it, but maybe an overview and then just pull out anything that you think should really be drawn to the committee's attention, if that makes sense.
Sure, that's fine. Thank you. And I'll ask Ms. Kitten or Dr. Perez to feel free to jump in at any time. So really what we have to do, we have to identify a Title IX coordinator. We have to identify, as you know, as Ashley said, a number of people to engage in this process. So we've had our administrative team trained. We're going to be doing some information sessions for our board this fall, but really that first instance of bold language there really talks about or really makes it overt that the board really is declaring the policy of the district to really comply with the federal law. So there's nothing necessarily earth-shattering in that first instance of bold language. As you go down the page, though, in some of the other bold language, there are some things that I want to draw your attention to. So when we talk about sexual harassment, if you look about halfway down the page, it says in the course of district-sponsored programs or activities, including transportation to or from school or school-sponsored activities. So one of the things that we need to do is not only to work with our administrators, but we also need to provide education for our students about the ramifications of discrimination and sexual harassment under Title IX. The policy goes on to start to summarize that the disciplinary consequences are applicable, or what the consequences will be articulated in other policies. And just like many of our policies, at the end there's a long list of numbered policies that we'll be going through over the next couple of months to make sure that we're in alignment. There's some work that we have to do with our student handbooks and our staff handbooks, and also some postings that need to be on our district website so that everyone is aware of the Title IX changes. If you keep scrolling and you go to the next page, it starts to talk about how investigations are done. And the reason that we are training our administrative team is because at some point, everybody will be involved in running some type of investigation. And our building principals need to be tightly aligned to these regulations so that they know what they're doing and what they're looking for. And then it also articulates a process that if the building principal or building assistant principal is a subject of a complaint, how we have to handle that. The disciplinary procedures, last year we started to look at our student code of conduct, which was really punitive. We've worked with the first wave of making it contain more restorative practice language to make it a little bit more proactive and restorative rather than punitive and reactive. But there's a bulk of information in this policy that basically points to if someone violates this policy because of their actions, basically it'll be pointing to our student code of conduct to how we handle those infractions. There's also a section about retaliation. Retaliation is something that this is an area that we really need to stress with our students, that engaging in an act that violates this policy is one thing, and it's a completely different thing than if you retaliate against someone that makes a good faith complaint. There are a number of definitions in the policy. One of the things that I really want to stress, the reason that typically we don't take the PSBA sample policies and say we want to review and adopt. I just want to stress again, we're recommending it in this case because these new procedures under the new regulations have not yet been tested in court. So I'm really hesitant to make any wide sweeping changes to the policies. But what we will do is look at these policies on a yearly basis, because I'm sure as Title IX gets tested or continues to be tested in courts, there will be some updates. There are a whole list of supportive measures listed in this policy, things that are non-disciplinary, non-punitive. And one of the things that I think is going to be really important as we roll out this policy and as we work with our students, not just around Title IX, but really converting our code of conduct to make it truly restorative, because having punitive discipline does not ultimately change behavior. There are times when things have to be punitive, no doubt, but there are absolutely more times that we need to be much more restorative. So there are a whole list of supportive measures that we can employ. The policy talks to how we have to align with, our actions for students that have IEPs. There's a whole section in here about sexual harassment, what sexual harassment is, the different types of sexual harassment. And then there is in every policy a delegation of responsibility. And so the delegation of responsibility is really the compliance officer and the Title IX coordinator. And there are enumerated on that policy 7 things that we must do. And one of the things that we have to do is, as part of the Safe Schools process, track all of the incidents that fall under Title IX. So when we do our annual data reports, we'll be sharing data about the type of behavioral infractions and infractions of policy, just like we share achievement data. There are training requirements that we have to make sure that we're in alignment with. As Ms. Kitten said, our administrative staff is already trained. And then there are disciplinary consequences. And what I want to stress in the disciplinary consequences, when we talk about things like suspensions and expulsions and referral to law enforcement officials, in the law, in our Safe Schools memo, there are things that we must report to the police. There are things that we have some discretion on reporting to the police. And then there are things that we absolutely don't have to report to the police. But when we think about police intervention, we think about suspension and expulsion, those decisions have grave consequences. And so those actions are not engaged in lightly. There's a lot of conversation. There's a lot of some deep thought before we engage in any of those. And that will continue under this policy. And then, I think this policy basically sets the stage, but the work that we have to do with staff and students around this policy is pretty deep, and it's going to be pretty intense as we look at the first couple of months of school. So I just did a lot of talking. I'll be quiet now and answer any questions that you might have.
Dr. Yanni, let me ask you one that I have, and then Mark, we'll get to you next. I see your hands up. In terms of like the code of conduct and the training that's going to flow out of this, I mean, in terms of like a timeline, in terms of that moving along, will the work to sort of get that training in place and the work to update the code of conduct, is that starting? Will it be starting? Do you need this policy in place first? How do you see that, kind of the chicken and the egg question?
So the code of conduct, we have a group of folks that are working on that already, and there are students involved in that as well. So that we're continually refining that so that our code of conduct makes sense. We're required to have this policy, but we can't wait for this policy to be in place before we do that work, because the law is in place now. So this policy really memorializes the law and the things that we have to do, but this work is already being done. We're also looking at our professional learning, professional development calendar for when we can roll things out to staff. And then by building, how do we, in developmentally appropriate ways, educate our kids about some of these very serious, heavy topics.
Excellent, appreciate it. I might have a couple others, but let's pass the baton a little bit. Mark, you had your hand up first. How about you go first?
Thanks. As I often say when we look at these PSBA policies, I really don't like the way it's written very much, in that I think it includes way too much stuff that it doesn't need to include. It should reference federal law in the case of Title IX. It can allow us to reference our existing disciplinary policies, etc., student conduct policies. However, in this particular case, because, as you said up front, the untested nature of the new Title IX regulations and the inevitable court attention they will get, hopefully not here, but somewhere, I think it is important to adopt it as is. And so I'm actually recommending, I appreciate that several Oxford commas have been added to the SBA policy. And that other than that, I think it's probably good to go, at least up to second reading.
Right. And Mr. Sirota, I completely agree with you. And I think this is the first time, at least since I've been here, that we've actually looked at a PSBA policy and have not made significant changes. So.
And Dr. Yanni, would it be fair to say,
become a habit, but I think it's the right thing to do in this case.
Right.
Yeah. And you mentioned we'll obviously review it on a yearly basis, but if something changes in the interim, we can always bring it back to look at something, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And our executive leadership team, we're also going to be working on some ARs to go along with it that we'll bring back just for the committee and boards information in the next month or so.
Excellent, appreciate it. Darlene, your hand's up.
Yes, just piggybacking a little bit on the professional development around this policy. I just want to make sure that we include folks that aren't part of our faculty and staff, that may be coaches. That's often a group that sometimes is forgotten because they're not right there, and it's a little more difficult to pull them in. But obviously the training is going to be critical, and I want to make sure those people are included.
Yeah, absolutely. And through our Safe Schools training, Dr. Davis, we make sure that we do capture those groups. So, coaches, custodians, educational assistants, everybody needs to be aware of this, and so everyone will go through that training.
Yeah, and I know that those that are on staff, certainly it's easier to get them. It's those coaches that work in another district and only come in, or they come in the evening. They're oftentimes much harder to pull in. So just know that.
Right, and we will probably do a series of training sessions for like that group of people, folks that come in and only do some extra duty stuff for us, that they're not our employees during the day, some coaches and some advisors of extracurricular. So we'll make sure that gets done.
Great, thanks.
Any other board members have any questions or comments? All right. With that, I think I concur with Dr. Yanni and Mr. Sirota. Dr. Davis, if you don't, please let us know that we should move this forward and not tinker with it per se, other than perhaps the Oxford comma here or there, or a capitalization. I think it makes sense to move it forward to the legislative agenda. Mark and Darlene, do you agree with that as well?
Absolutely.
Yep, I agree.
Okay, very good. We'll move that for first reading to the legislative agenda. And the second policy we've got tonight is policy 146.1, which is trauma-informed approach. It's a new policy, and Dr. Yanni, if you could describe this for the committee and the board a little bit.
Sure, it is a new policy. We've been talking about trauma-informed instruction over the last 2 years. Trauma-informed instruction and trauma-informed practices have really gotten a lot of attention, specifically over the last 2 years. But when we really think about what has transpired over the last 6 to 7 months, especially with COVID, trauma-informed discussions have come right to the forefront. So when we think about how we teach and how we educate kids, you know, districts put so much emphasis on the academic side of things, and many times the mental health, the social emotional pieces don't get the attention that they really need to get. In the spring, we had a number of professional learning opportunities set up with some experts in trauma, and they unfortunately were canceled because of COVID. We have re-engaged some of those folks to work with our staff, particularly our counselors, particularly our social workers, particularly our student assistance teams, to make sure that everyone really understands what we're talking about. And I normally don't like to read something that's up on a screen, but I do think for everyone's information, we really need to have a conversation about what trauma is and what a trauma-informed approach is. So if you look there at the definition of trauma, it includes effects of an event, series of event, or set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual, either physically or emotionally harmful, or threatening, and has lasting adverse effects on their cognitive functioning, social, emotional, mental health, spiritual well-being. And in a traditional sense, when we think about trauma, we think about, you know, these huge events. Somebody sees someone gets murdered, someone is abused, but there are any number of things that can create trauma in kids that we really need to be sensitive to. So the trauma-informed approach is really what is a school-wide, a district-wide, a system-wide approach to educating kids that helps the adults recognize the symptoms of trauma and respond appropriately, because we know that every behavior has a function behind it. And many times when kids experience trauma, they act or react in ways that exhibit behaviors, and they get disciplined for the behavior, and we're not really digging down into the root cause. So the whole intent of this policy is really to articulate that, and then we're going to be developing a series of administrative regulations that will clearly articulate how it is that we are engaging in trauma-informed approaches with our kids. There are a number of things that we need to do to comply with this policy. Student attendance policy and practices that focus on reasons for absences. So the state used to have a process called TEP, truancy elimination plans. They became really arduous, and a lot of districts let them go by the wayside, but really digging into the underlying and root causes for why kids aren't coming to school. Disciplinary practices that incorporate restorative practices. We're well on our way with that, but there's some more work to do there. Curriculum and planned instruction K-12 that focuses on social and emotional learning. Service policies that focus on supporting students. Policies and training that focus on appropriate but supportive relationships between adults and students, our wellness policy. We have to have policies and practices that promote safety and security, that build positive relationships with law enforcement agencies, which, you know, I think we have, and they're continuing to get better. Making sure that our budget is reflective of resources and training related to trauma-informed approaches. Review of facilities and future facilities to make sure that the environments are really attentive and developmentally appropriate for kids. And then also looking at culturally responsive practices that really ultimately will result in true equitable practices for our kids. There's training that needs to happen. So any new or newly elected board members need to be trained in trauma-informed. And I know our new board members received some of that training last year after the election. We have to do some administrative and professional employees training for them. This policy and what is written in legislation is that that training only has to be for administrative and professional employees. When we write our administrative regulation, we're going to write it such that we're going to be really working with all of our staff, because it's not just administrative staff and professional staff that come in contact with kids. We need to do training on the trauma-informed approach and related topics with all of our staff. And then the same thing for any, you know, volunteers, parents, guardians, community members that come in contact with our kids. The rest of the policy really articulates the screening and the services that we need to provide. And again, the trauma-informed approach, we actually have to develop a plan, and that'll be done over the next couple of months, where we're really focusing on the ideas of resilience and self-awareness with kids, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, social awareness, safe and healthy choices and behaviors, coping strategies, and advocating for themselves. There's also a staff wellness and support component to this policy. We have to have an employee assistance program. We need to support our staff on self-care plans and peer support. And there's data collection. So just like we track behavioral data, we need to create or to collect data on the effects of our trauma-informed approach. And so that will be part of the Safe Schools report. Safe to Say is going to continue to be a major component of this policy and of this work. For those of you who might not remember, Safe to Say is the anonymous tip line that kids can self-report or report others that are having some difficulties. And then we're also looking at really tightening up this year our positive behavior intervention supports for kids across the district.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that explanation and summary for us. Any questions from anybody on the committee first, or on the board as well? Or discussion points? Jen, your hand was up first.
Yes. So it sounds like you have an excellent approach, and I like that you're including the teachers in this training. When you say it's going to be offered as professional development, do the teachers have is it like a la carte and they pick, or do you make sure that there's people from each building, you know, that we're spreading out, getting people trained where we need them?
Right, that's a great question. So when we do professional learning, there are things that folks must do, and then there are some optional things. This will be one of the things that they must do. It's not optional. So we want to make sure when we have something as important as this, that we make sure that this professional development touches all of our staff.
Thank you.
Mark, I saw your hand go up as well.
Yep, thanks. thinking about the policy, the specifics of the policy, I'm okay with moving this forward to the legislative, and then, but before we get to second reading, I would like to ask that the administration go through this and separate out the parts of it that, and we've done this for other policies, the parts of this that are really what the board is directing should remain here, and the parts of it that are really what the administration is recommending should be in an AR. I think there's a lot of that here. Now, I do recognize that in this case, there is new school code language directing part of this. And so a portion of what I probably think belongs in AR might actually belong in policy for that reason, but I don't think it's all of this.
No, and I think that's a good point, Mr. Sirota. So one of the things that we'll be talking about as an executive leadership team, you know, there's a ton of language in here that really can be, it can stay where it is, or it can go to administrative regulation. And so I anticipate there won't be substantive changes to the information itself, but when it comes back for a second reading, it will just be divided up like you suggested, what stays in policy and what may move to an administrative regulation.
Great, yeah, thank you.
Excellent. Anybody else? Jen, is your hand up again or no? Okay, all good. Any other committee members or board members with anything on this policy? All right, Mark and Darlene, if you concur, I say we move this toward the legislative agenda for first reading. Obviously, for second reading, as Mark just suggested, we'll have potentially some division into an AR, but I think this is a great policy to get in place, and that we should move it to the legislative agenda.
I concur.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a great policy. I'm excited that we're moving in this direction.
Excellent. And we thank the administration.
I should also mention that we're going to be working with the Mid-Atlantic Consortium for Equity, and we're going to be doing some peer leadership work. And so we will have kids tightly aligned with the training that we're doing, because it will involve them as well. I'm sorry.
Very good.
Mr. Wallach.
No, I was just going to thank the administration for making this something to rise to the forefront of our district and our policies and procedures. Okay, we have one other new first reading tonight. It is policy 247, which is the hazing policy. Dr. Yanni, if you could intro that one a little bit.
Sure. So our hazing policy is actually in decent shape. There are some updates that PSBA are suggesting because of the Title IX legislation. And so I'll just go over some of the things that are in bold. As Mr. Sirota suggested with the last policy, there may be a few sections of this that when it comes back next month, we may have moved some of it to an administrative regulation. There was greater clarification around the definition of hazing. The new definition, it's not brand new, but it is a little bit more comprehensive than it was before. And to Dr. Davis's point about training coaches and folks that might not be with us as full-time employees, this is a policy that as we roll it out, we will be doing specific training with our coaches and our advisors of extracurriculars, because this topic is so relevant to those areas. They also added definitions about aggravated hazing and also organizational hazing. Those two definitions were a little more implicit in previous versions of hazing policies, but they're more overt in this policy. We talk a lot, we've had a lot of discussion as a superintendent group about not only this policy, but hazing in general. And the media and national attention it has gotten because so many times we focus on the bodily injury that results from hazing, but there's also a mental health aspect that occurs, some dangerous mental health things that arise after someone is hazed, which actually goes back to the previous policy, the trauma informed, so everything sort of aligns together. And we really want to make sure that we're very explicit when we work with our students about not only the fact that you are not legally allowed to haze anyone, but the really negative and disastrous effects it could have. There's some just brief references to the Title I or Title IX coordinator in here because of the change in legislation. And then really the rest of it, I struck the language. There was some language added about how we can fine kids if they engage in hazing. Again, as we think about the student code of conduct, being punitive doesn't really change behavior. So I actually struck that language. I would prefer not to have language about fining kids. We don't really have any recourse or really way to ensure that we collect any fine that we would impose on kids. And if, I also don't want to put something in a policy that becomes a financial hardship. So if a student does make a negative choice, to then have a financial hit on top of it seems, just to add insult to injury. And again, with the intent of this policy, to make sure that anyone that really is coming in contact with kids, but especially those folks that are running our athletics and our extracurriculars, even if they're volunteers, understand what hazing is and understands the district's and the law's position against hazing.
Very good. Appreciate it. Question just out of curiosity, if you know, the definitions as they were revised, was that a code definition that drove that, or was that just sort of a development through other processes?
It was through the Title IX, through some of the Title IX work that was done.
Okay, appreciate it. And I do like the fact that one of the ads we put into the policy back in the right above where we took out the fines was including restorative practices expressly as an option there. I think that's great. Questions, comments, discussion from the committee or the board? Mark, your hand is up.
Yeah, in that same section you're talking about where it mentions restorative practices, I notice it says from restorative practices up to and including expulsion. In the previous policy.
Yeah, it should say, I'm sorry, from disciplinary, I worded it incorrectly. I just picked up on that. I need to clean up that language there.
Yeah, the thing I was picking up on was the previous policy had a step beyond expulsion, which is referral to law enforcement. It's the same sort of thing. We have a policy around disciplinary action, and I think referencing it rather than being specific here is safer because we end up with accidental conflicts if we try to say the same thing in two policies.
Exactly right.
The other thing I notice is, and I normally don't bother mentioning them, but because, a lot of this wording came from elsewhere, there are a bunch of missing Oxford commas. And in fact, there are a couple of them that actually do potentially make a difference in the meaning. So let's be careful to include them.
Sure.
I think it's a good point. There, just as an aside, was a Pennsylvania appellate court decision that came down within the last week that was completely driven by the inclusion or absence of an Oxford comma in the interpretation of a statute, believe it or not. So, I mean, we joke about that, and I might have been a late changer to the bandwagon, but it can be very meaningful. So I appreciate that, Mark, a lot.
A few years ago, there was a Maine Supreme Court decision that hinged on an Oxford comma as well.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, those of us that always believed in the Oxford comma, we've been right so far.
I'll take care of those changes. Thanks.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Any other questions or comments on 247? Okay, I think we should move that forward to the legislative agenda. Mark and Darlene, you concur?
Absolutely.
I do.
Excellent. We will move that along. That closes the items on the main part of the agenda in terms of recommendations, and we're up to item number 6 on our agenda, which is community input. To my knowledge, there were no questions submitted in advance of this meeting. So if any, thank you, Ms. Evans. If any community members wish to engage in community input, please raise your hand and we will afford that opportunity. I do not see any hands up or going up from attendees in our meeting. So seeing none, I will close community input. Dr. Yanni, any closing comments or thoughts before we adjourn our meeting for this evening?
Starting with next month's policy committee meeting, we will include, just as an informational items, sort of the yearly schedule of the policies that we have to look at, and during what months we will plan to look at them for a first reading, a second reading, and then have them approved so that we can keep track of how we're moving through the policy book. Our policy book is in pretty good shape. We want to make sure that the policies that have to be reviewed annually are reviewed annually, and we want to continue to make sure that our book stays current. So that will become an informational item starting in the September committee meeting.
Great, we very much appreciate that. Okay, our next policy committee meeting will be on Wednesday, September the 2nd. We're going to couple back to the education committee meeting, unlike what we did with finance this month. So it'll be at either 7:15 or immediately following the education committee meeting on September the 2nd, 2020. And with that, I will adjourn our committee meeting. I thank everyone and wish everyone a good night.
Thanks so much.
Good night. Take care, everyone.